My parents were missionaries in Africa when I was growing up. They have long since passed, but I still keep in touch with friends who still live there and have made a few trips there to visit. One of these family friends has operated a safari company for decades. Whenever I visit, I usually stay with them for a week or so. It's been almost 8 years since my last visit, and I want to go back. My ex-wife and I divorced about 15 years ago. Our son is now 35 and has a wife and twin girls who are 13. I remarried 6 years ago, and my current wife has a daughter, Pam, who is 38, from a previous relationship. Pam also has her own family. When I told my wife about wanting to plan another trip to Africa, she was very excited. I contacted my family friend and he offered me a great deal to stay at their safari camp, but only for a specific 2-week window. I told my wife about the deal my friend offered, and she asked if it would be possible to invite her daughter and her family on the trip. I was hesitant because Pam and I have never really seen eye to eye, but I figured this might be the type of trip that would bring us closer through a unique shared experience. When we first approached Pam about the idea, she was totally on board, but things went south pretty quick. First, the window for the trip wouldn't work for them because Pam's daughter has a softball tournament at that time that she can't miss. They did, however, offer to help cover the higher cost so that the daughter could still make the tournament. Next, however, came the deal breaker. Pam had asked how I knew my friends there, and I explained that my parents were missionaries long ago. A few days later, she came to visit with her daughters and told me that they are uncomfortable staying with colonizers and asked if we can change the trip completely. I straight up told them no and told them they are no longer welcome to join us on this trip. It turned into an argument and I had to ask them to leave. My wife was in tears by the end of it. Not wanting to miss out on the deal my friend was offering, I instead extended the invitation to my son and his family. He jumped at the opportunity without asking any questions. When I told him about the time window and where we were staying, he said he didn't care and they would make it work. No hassle. I told my wife that my son and his family would be joining us on the trip instead, and she got mad at me. She told me that I should have at least tried to talk with Pam about it again to see if we could make it work before inviting my son. I told her that I am not going to bring Pam and her family after they insulted my parents and have been making everything more difficult from day one. I told her my son and his family aren't making this nearly as difficult as Pam has been, and they also didn't call my parents colonizers. My wife thinks I should give Pam another chance, but it's too late for that. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Not the idiot. Good on you for disinviting Pam and her brood. I've done volunteer work in Africa, and I am in awe of the commitment, selflessness, and dedication shown by the missionaries that work in the remotest part of the continent. They are not in the same category as colonizers. ETA. I just realized that you haven't made this trip since marrying your new wife. Are you sure she doesn't share the same sentiments as her daughter? Comment 2. Not the idiot. If she wanted to go to a different place on a different date, then really it's not the same trip. So you haven't uninvited her from anything, you've simply declined to go on a different trip. I hope you have a great time out there. P.S. I recognize that there is a complicated history with white landowners in Africa, for which there is no easy solution. I don't really think that comes into this discussion, though. Now for the update, thanks for reading my last post. So after the argument with Pam and her daughters, things have been pretty tense around the house. My wife and I have been barely talking, and when we do, it usually ends in another argument about the trip. She keeps saying I should have handled things differently with Pam, but I stand by my decision. I mean, how could I let someone who disrespected my parents come along? Anyway, my son and his family were thrilled about the trip. We started planning everything, from flights to vaccinations. My granddaughters were especially excited about seeing the animals and experiencing something so different from their everyday lives. It felt good to have something positive to focus on, even though things at home were still rocky. But then out of nowhere, Pam showed up at our house one evening. She didn't come alone. She brought her husband and kids. They wanted to talk things out. I was skeptical, but my wife insisted we hear them out. Pam apologized for her earlier comments and said she didn't mean to disrespect my parents. She explained that she was just concerned about the kind of environment her kids would be exposed to. Her husband chimed in, saying they had done some research and found other safari options that might be more culturally sensitive. I could see my wife softening, but I wasn't convinced. I told Pam that while I appreciated the apology, The trip was already planned with my son and his family. Pam got upset and accused me of favoring my son over her. My wife tried to mediate, but it just turned into another shouting match. Pam left in a huff, and my wife was once again in tears. The next few days were a blur of tension and awkward silences. My wife and I were barely speaking, and when we did, it was usually about mundane things like groceries or bills. I could tell she was still upset about the whole situation with Pam, but I didn't know how to fix it. I was also starting to feel guilty about how things had turned out. Maybe I had been too harsh, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Pam had crossed a line. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my son called with some bad news. His wife had been in a car accident. She was okay, but she had a broken leg and would need surgery. There was no way they could make the trip now. I felt terrible for them and told my son not to worry about the trip. Family comes first, after all. So there I was with a trip planned and no one to go with. I thought about canceling, but my wife insisted we still go. She said it might be good for us to get away and have some time to ourselves. I agreed, hoping the trip might help us reconnect. We finally made it to Africa, but the trip was far from the dream vacation I had envisioned. My wife was distant and spent most of her time on her phone, texting Pam and checking in on our son's family. I tried to enjoy the safari, but it was hard to focus on the beauty around me when things were so strained between us. One evening, we had a particularly bad argument. My wife accused me of not caring about her feelings and being too stubborn to see things from Pam's perspective. I told her I felt like she was taking Pam's side over mine. It was a mess, and we both ended up saying things we regretted. The next day, I decided to take a walk by myself to clear my head. As I wandered through the camp, I started thinking about my parents and the time we spent in Africa when I was a kid. I remembered how they always tried to help people and make a difference, even when it was hard. I realized that maybe I had been too rigid in my thinking and that my parents would have wanted me to find a way to make peace with Pam. When I got back to our tent, I found my wife sitting outside looking out at the sunset. I sat down next to her and told her about my walk and what I had been thinking. She listened quietly, and for the first time in days, we had a real conversation. We talked about our parents, our kids, and how we both wanted to make things right. We decided to cut the trip short and head back home. It wasn't the vacation we had planned, but it felt like the right thing to do. When we got back, I reached out to Pam and asked if we could meet up and talk. She agreed, and we had a long, honest conversation about everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, but we managed to find some common ground and start rebuilding our relationship. Things are still a work in progress, but at least we're trying. My wife and I are also working on our relationship, taking things one day at a time. It's been a tough few weeks, but I feel like we're finally moving in the right direction. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for ruining my cousin's wedding with a tattoo disaster? So a little bit about my background. I am a tattoo artist. I did an apprenticeship for the first year of tattooing. I have been working as a tattoo artist for 4 years now, and recently opened a studio. My family and I have been invited to a wedding in another state. My cousin, let's call him Matt, is getting married, and we received the invitation a few months ago. Time has passed, and now the wedding is only a week away. Out of nowhere, Matt texted me saying something like, "You're going to tattoo me on my wedding day." I was confused because I never even considered bringing my equipment since I didn't plan on working or anything. A guest spot is when a tattoo artist works at another studio for a few days or weeks, usually in a different area to expand their client base. As a joke, I asked if he had a tattoo machine, hoping he wasn't serious. He then asked if I didn't have one and said that one machine wouldn't take up much space to bring along. I replied that I didn't plan on bringing my equipment, which includes more than just a machine, such as ink, hygiene supplies, and stencil, and that I'm not prepared to tattoo at a wedding where I don't know anything about the location, whether it's indoors or outdoors, etc. He then said that he had planned on this and that it would mean a lot to him to have a tattoo on his wedding day, and that he wanted me to be the one to tattoo him. Keep in mind, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. I tried again to explain that I don't feel comfortable with it and that it's short notice considering I have work until my brother and I fly over for the wedding, and a tattoo needs to be designed first, right? He saw my message but didn't reply. This morning, my mother called and she was furious. She asked why I couldn't get myself together and just tattoo Matt. I explained what I had already told Matt, but she didn't want to hear it. She just said it would mean a lot to her and Matt's family if I did it, and that it could be my wedding gift. Then she hung up. I talked to my brother about it, and he just shrugged and said, "It would be nice of you, though." I'm unsure of what to do now. Like I said, I'm not comfortable with the whole situation, especially because I've never done a guest spot before and never had to travel or fly on a plane with my equipment. But is it just selfish of me? I mean, it seems to mean a lot to everyone, and I'm just saying no? To add one, I already have an actual wedding gift as they included a wish list with their invitations. They mentioned that they wanted artwork because they recently moved into a bigger house and wanted some random artwork for decoration. I painted them an oil painting that I spent several days on, so I don't plan on giving him a voucher as a gift. 2, as far as I know, Matt doesn't have any tattoos. 3, I don't know what my mom's issue is with all of this. I think she just wants to keep the peace. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1, not the idiot. Is there a problem with them communicating this to you earlier than a week before? If you aren't comfortable hauling all that stuff with you, I would just say they wouldn't allow the machine on the plane because of the needles, or it took up too much space. He is putting you on the spot, and I'm wondering why your family is putting on the pressure. Everyone is being very disrespectful of your personal time. Maybe you wanted to relax, not take your job with you. Comment 2, not the idiot. What is really wrong with your mother? Honestly, while I'm not a tattoo artist, I think it's unethical and unprofessional to engage in tattoo services at a wedding or another place other than your studio. If Matt wants to have a tattoo done, tell him to come to your studio, and you can do it for him before or after the wedding as a wedding gift, not during the ceremony. Geez, this is so ridiculous. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me through this. So after my mom's call, I decided to give it some more thought. I didn't want to ruin Matt's big day, but I also didn't want to compromise my professional standards. I called Matt to try and talk things through, but he didn't pick up. I left a message saying I needed to discuss the logistics and my concerns. I didn't hear back from him that day. The next morning, I got a text from Matt saying he understood my concerns but still hoped I could make it work. He suggested I could use a local studio's equipment. I was hesitant but agreed to look into it. I called a few studios in the area, and one of them was willing to lend me their space and equipment for a couple of hours on the wedding day. It seemed like a solution, so I decided to go for it. I spent the next few days designing a tattoo that I thought Matt would like. I didn't have any input from him, so I went with something simple and elegant. A small, intricate design of intertwined rings with their wedding date. I figured it was symbolic and wouldn't take too long to complete. We flew out to the wedding location and I brought my basic supplies just in case. When we arrived, I finally got a chance to talk to Matt in person. He seemed relieved that I was willing to do the tattoo, but he dropped the news on me. He wanted the tattoo on his forearm, and he wanted it to be a large, detailed portrait of his fiancée. I was floored. This was way more complicated than I had anticipated, and I didn't have the time or the right equipment to pull it off. I tried to explain to Matt that a portrait tattoo required a lot more preparation and specialized equipment, and it wasn't something I could do on such short notice. He looked disappointed, but said he understood. I offered to do the smaller design I had prepared, and he reluctantly agreed. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I went to the local studio to set up, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Matt arrived, and we got started on the tattoo. About halfway through, I realized I had made a critical mistake. I had forgotten to double-check the date. I had tattooed the wrong wedding date on his arm. I was mortified. I immediately told Matt, and he was understandably upset. We had to stop the session, and I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to fix it. I felt terrible for ruining such an important moment for him. I apologized profusely, but the damage was done. The fallout was immediate. Matt's fiancée was furious, and my mom was disappointed. The wedding went on, but there was a noticeable tension in the air. I felt like I had let everyone down. I spent the rest of the trip trying to make amends, but it was clear that things would never be the same. When we got back home, I decided to reach out to Matt again to see if we could fix the tattoo. He was still upset, but agreed to let me try. We scheduled a session at my studio, and I spent hours correcting the mistake. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than before. Matt seemed to appreciate the effort, but our relationship was strained. Looking back, I realized that I had underestimated the importance of communication and preparation. I should have insisted on more details from Matt before agreeing to anything. I also learned that sometimes, no matter how well-intentioned you are, things can still go wrong. As for my mom, she eventually came around and understood my side of the story. She admitted that she had been too focused on keeping the peace and hadn't considered the practical aspects of the situation. We had a long talk about boundaries and expectations, and I think it helped us understand each other better. In the end, I learned a lot from this experience. It was a harsh lesson, but it made me a better artist and a more cautious person. I still feel bad about what happened, but I'm trying to move forward and focus on the positive aspects of my work and relationships. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for calling my parents evil and heartless for how they treat my wife? 33-year-old male had a very big fight with my parents over the way they speak to and about my wife Rain, 32-year-old female. The end result of the fight is I asked them how they could be so evil and told them they should reflect on how heartless they are acting, but that would require them to have a heart. Of course, that is a very strong stance, and calling someone evil is extreme. But they have infuriated me, and I don't look at them the same anymore. But I want to know if I went too far. So background. Rain and I met in college, and we started out as friends who fell in love over time, 2 years. We got married a year after Rain graduated, and we knew we wanted to start a family, so we agreed to try before we were 30. We were successful, and Rain got pregnant with our daughter Miley, but we didn't have a happy outcome. When Rain was 8 months pregnant with Miley, her father and brother were involved in a car crash. Rain's brother lived for 8 days after, and her father for 9. And on the 10th day, our beautiful Miley was stillborn. I struggled to hold it together, but Rain's losses were just unbearable. That time of year is always difficult for Rain. 3 losses in 3 days, and she found it hard to come back from that. Those losses are still felt very strongly. Fast forward a few years and Rain is expecting our son. The somewhat difficult part is he is due around that same time. It's somewhat bittersweet because Miley should be excited about a baby brother. My father-in-law and brother-in-law should be excited about another baby joining the family, but they're not here. This is where my family comes in. My mom told Rain that she can now focus on happiness around that time of the year instead of sadness. I told Mom she was being insensitive, and my mom said Rain needs to decide this will only be a happy time, so our son isn't burdened by the losses. Rain told my mom she would still be happy about our son, but there'll always be a sadness about our losses. My dad's response was to say Rain should keep that to herself and act like it was any other time of the year. My mom agreed with him and said all honors to the dead should be kept private. Rain said that's not how grief works and it's not how love works. I told them it wasn't their decision how we honor or remember those we lost, and I warned them to be very careful. So my parents decided to go for the worst thing they could say, and they told Rain she will be a terrible mother to our son, and he deserves better, that he deserves to be more important than loss and grief. I asked Rain to wait for me in the car, and it's when the fight with my parents took place. They argued that Rain was being selfish and acting like she was the only person who ever lost anyone. They wanted me to take mine and Rain's son away from her, and oh, I still see red when I think about it. Calling them evil hit a nerve, and I was told by my parents and some of my siblings that I took it too far. While I'm not sure there's any coming back from this, am I the jerk? Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. I would set my course as no contact with your extremely repugnant parents. By the way, congratulations on the birth of your little boy. You are doing an excellent job at protecting your little family. I am proud of you. Your parents, however, do not respect you or your wife and do not understand boundaries and asking for forgiveness for their thoughtless and hurtful behavior. Go no contact. Congrats again. Comment 2. Not the idiot. That is truly evil. They tried to steal away a woman's own baby because she grieves somewhat openly about a horrific time in her life that is most likely to be the worst part of her life throughout the rest of it. You might want to seriously consider cutting them off totally if they want you to divorce her that quickly over such an inconsequential thing as grieving. Now for the update, thanks for all the comments from the last post. So a lot has happened since that big fight with my parents. 3 months have passed and things have been pretty intense. First off, Rain gave birth to our son Ethan a few weeks ago. The birth was a mix of joy and anxiety, especially given the timing around the anniversary of our losses. Rain was incredibly strong throughout the whole process, but I could see the emotional toll it was taking on her. We decided to have a small private ceremony to honor Miley, her father, and her brother before Ethan was born. It was just the two of us, and it felt right. It gave us a sense of closure and allowed us to welcome Ethan with open hearts. But here's where things took a turn. My parents found out about the ceremony and were furious. They accused us of being morbid and said we were starting Ethan's life on a negative note. This led to another heated argument, and I told them they had no right to dictate how we grieve or celebrate our family. My mom started crying, saying she just wanted us to be happy, but I couldn't help but feel she was missing the point entirely. In the midst of all this, my sister reached out to me. She had been quiet during the initial fight, but now wanted to talk. She told me she understood why I was so upset and that she had been feeling the same way about our parents for a while. She shared some things I didn't know, like how our parents had always been dismissive of her feelings too. This was a revelation for me and made me realize that the issue was bigger than just Rain and me. It was about how our parents treated all of us. Rain, on the other hand, has been amazing. Despite everything, she's been focusing on Ethan and trying to create a positive environment for him. She's been going to therapy to deal with her grief and has even started a support group for other moms who have experienced similar losses. Watching her strength and resilience has been inspiring, and it's made me even more determined to stand by her. But then something happened that changed everything. My dad had a heart attack. It was sudden and unexpected, and it shook all of us to the core. He survived, but it was a wake-up call for everyone. While he was in the hospital, I had a lot of time to think. I realized that despite all the anger and hurt, I didn't want to lose my parents. I wanted them to be a part of Ethan's life, but not at the cost of Rain's well-being. When my dad was well enough, I went to visit him. We had a long, difficult conversation. I told him how much his words had hurt us and how we needed him to understand our perspective. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I didn't expect. He apologized. He said he had been wrong and that he didn't realize how much pain he was causing. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. My mom, however, has been more resistant. She still believes that focusing on happiness is the best way to move forward, and she doesn't understand why we can't just let go of the past. It's been frustrating, but I'm trying to be patient. I know change doesn't happen overnight. As for my siblings, they've been supportive. My sister in particular has been a rock for me. She's been helping out with Ethan and has been a great sounding board for my frustrations. My brother, who initially sided with my parents, has also come around. He admitted that he didn't fully understand the depth of our grief and that he was wrong to judge us. Through all of this, I've learned a lot about myself and my family. I've realized that while I can't change my parents, I can set boundaries and protect my own family. I've also learned that it's okay to ask for help and that it's important to have a support system. Rain and I have decided to take a break from my parents for a while. We need time to heal and to focus on our new family. We're planning to move to a new house in a different part of town, away from the constant reminders of our losses and the tension with my parents. It's a fresh start for us and we're excited about the future. In the meantime, we're taking things one day at a time. We're learning to navigate this new chapter of our lives and to find a balance between honoring our past and embracing our future. It's not easy, but we're doing it together and that's what matters. Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day!